Hey, good morning.
Guru? What?
Pardon me?
Submit Guru?
Oh, sorry, man. Here, hold on. Let me fix that up. It's not a submit guru.
Submit Guru.
Well, we have to always identify who. That's my signature, man. That's my style. There we go. There we go. If I pause that, my audio still goes. Yeah. Okay, we're good.
Can you make me a host too? That way I can see who raises
Yeah,
hands.
you know what?
Or that doesn't let you.
I don't know. Let's see. Just a sec. Make host. I think that takes it away from me, though. Let me see. Do you want to change the host to Eric?
No.
No? Okay, because then I won't have any.
My account has an option for co-hosting. So
I see. I see. Well, your account's better than my account.
That's okay. I just don't understand how the accounts work because there's so many various facets of Zoom that I just confuse.
You know what? I think you can call that marketing craft.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because that's typically what happens is they come up with different things and then, bolt it onto their existing systems. We have a cell phone company called Rogers, which is in pretty much the biggest one in Canada. It's two real big ones. And their software is just marketing keeps introducing these crazy plans, and stuff slips through the cracks every time they add a new plan, and grandfathering the old plan, and stuff doesn't get moved over. So you literally have to check your bill every 3 to 4 months to make sure there's not some random charge on there. All right, I'm going to be back in a second. I pause. My screen's frozen. I thought we had 80 registered, but it was last week. This week we have about 50 registered. So I'll be back in a bit. Hi, Colleen. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks.
Good.
Giancarlo, ciao. How are you? But he never has his headset plugged in.
Ella,
Hey.
I'm fine. Actually, do you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes. Giancarlo's in.
I think that I did it this because I've been quite ill for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I had this coronavirus and just in a weak way, not very
Mm-hmm.
strong.
Wow.
So 14 days.
Right. And what's the family? What about the family?
Everybody is okay. We are all together, lovely in the same house.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay. It's okay. It's very long because actually it's 18 days that I don't get out.
Mm.
So, and actually I should not get out because since when you have symptoms, you shouldn't get out. You mustn't get out.
Yeah.
So I'm here. Very bored. No, bored the first 2 weeks. Now I'm okay.
Mm.
But the situation is quite tough because we are in a complete lockdown,
Mm-hmm.
and every shop is closed, and everything is not moving anymore. So I don't know what will happen when the lockdown will be off. I don't know.
I know the numbers. Your daily new numbers are not really dropping down much. So you'll know in another week because you just increased the level of lockdown. I think a week ago maybe.
I think that child is 1 month and a half that they don't go to school.
Yeah,
and maybe they want to go back to school probably. And actually, the first thought was to leave to unlock the lockdown the 3rd of April, but I think that it will be
bad idea.
Sure that it will be we will be under lockdown for another month, I think.
Right.
And everything that the government did is absolutely ridiculous. So there is no real real money to support the economy. So
right.
we will see in the next.
So was it you were finding? Were you finding people weren't respecting, didn't realize how severe it was at the beginning? Is that what you think? Italy got hit really hard.
Me too. Me too. Because I thought that it was too much. We were too scared. Actually, I was wrong. Like many others. So I went to ski. I did everything. And actually, it was the best is probably to lock down immediately everything and to try to stop.
Right. And some countries have done that right away, pretty much. New Zealand was a real tight one. They clamped down really quick. And we were about the middle of the pack, I think, Canada. So our numbers are holding. They're not climbing. They're staying pretty steady right now. So we're starting to see the effects.
The fact, I think, if I did it, obviously I don't know it, but the fact is that it's very weak. That is the power. Have you seen Bill Gates talk of some years ago, and he was saying that if a virus with not very powerful, not like Ebola, would have come, we would have get into trouble. The fact is that you have some fever, but not a lot, and you're weak, but not a lot. Your feeling are not so bad. So you take an aspirin, you go around, and maybe you go to do sport, and because if you get an aspirin, and that spread the virus around, and somebody get very very. But the most are not. We have, for example, I have my brother has a friend. Her father was died about the coronavirus. They live all together, so they have one death in the house. The mother that is ill, and she is ill, but she's only tired. No other symptoms. So she's only very very tired.
So the same household basically. A couple about the same age. The father passed away, and the mother is just mildly sick.
Exactly, and her nothing, just tired. So she's doing yoga by Skype with my brother, so she's okay. But she's ill if she has the virus.
Right. For those people who just jumped in, welcome, guys. We're just having a quick pre-chat with Giancarlo. He's located in Turin, Italy. So he's just kind of giving us an update. So, wow, that's really, that's pretty crazy stuff. So, all right. I guess we can, let me just unshare I guess we can get going now. We got it's kind of a fun, we're going to have, hopefully have lots of fun today. Thanks everybody for coming out. I'm Charles Delfs, founder of FM BettterForms. Probably know that already, most likely from the email. So, and we got a really sort of my right-hand consultant or dev that I bounce a lot of ideas off of, Eric, who's going to be joining us today. And he's been working on a vertical application. So what we're finding with BettterForms is we're finding that there's a real sweet spot for verticals and software as a service type apps. And we'll talk about some of the reasons for that and get in a little bit under the hood. And Eric's got a number of really neat things to show. For questions and things like that, there is a feature that we just discovered, or at least I just discovered, and it's called Raise Your Hand, and it's underneath one of the menus. You can also click up and down, I don't know, like and dislike and faster and slower and a couple other things like that. But by all means, don't feel bad about interrupting Eric. Sorry, Eric, don't take it personally. But if you have to, just unmute your chat and jump right in. Because we want to have this not so much of a webinar presentation, but a little bit more interactive. We had a great turnout last week. We had about 50 devs last week with Fred Illis. He was UX from UXEdge.ca. And I just noticed he just came online. So welcome, Fred. And we're going to also be recording this because I know a lot of people have to sometimes jump off early, especially if we go over time. So we will be recording it. We'll send the email out probably Monday or Tuesday next week with the link. And we're going to probably be having my goal is at least a regular Friday live meetup for at least for the next month or so. So if this is our second one, we'll probably have at least 3 or 4 more, and then we'll fall back to maybe once a month after that. All right.
If you haven't found that chat yet, it's under the participants menu. So if you turn on your controls in Zoom and open participants, that's where you'll see those options to raise your hand and stuff. So
super. Oops, I'll go back a bit here. Okay, so I'll pass it over to you, Eric, if you want to jump in, and we'll just get started right away.
Okay. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, please do.
1 second. All right. So I just have my login window open because this is kind of the first point of your app, and I don't know. I guess I should start. I don't have a presentation like Fred had prepared, so so it may not be as exciting, but that I'm just gonna walk through it. So if you saw from the email, the Submit Guru is designed especially for film schools and film festivals to manage all of the video submissions that they might need, either for an end of year showcase where they're trying to show off everybody's hard work, or film festivals, obviously collecting submissions that way. So it's primarily targeted towards that kind of audience because there are some other platforms out there, but especially for schools. So the muffled, can I?
Yeah, he says that, but you sound okay to me. So,
okay.
So I don't think there's much we can do about it.
So especially for schools who they usually don't have a large budget, they're just trying to celebrate everybody's work. But there are still some film programs like the program that I'm a part of. I'm at a digital media arts school, and so this is the kind of stuff we deal with, where we still want to collect feedback from judges, which these are people who are volunteering their time, so we got to make it easy for them. And in the past, the system that we had set up for everybody was that everyone would submit to a local file server. So all the students, for example, they'd come and submit to a local file server, and they'd have to use some kind of special naming convention so we could understand everything. And then the staff at the school would pick out the submissions, they'd figure it all out file by file, upload it to YouTube one at a time to a private link, and then they would have to make manually these Google forms. And last year it was so hard for the judges because there was no sense of progress. So the judges got super frustrated. They'd click next and there would just be a new thing. They didn't know how many more were left. And so that kind of skews your results. So there's just a bunch of issues that way. And then of course, getting the results too, and getting the judges' feedback back to students per specific film was kind of complicated. So I thought, well, there's got to be a way that FileMaker can do this. And I actually started building something in FileMaker. But around this time is when BettterForms came out, and I realized, and I started using BettterForms for other things and realized, well, I can make this, if I'm going to build something well, I want to build it for something that more than just my organization can use. And so that's where I started to look into a vertical.
So Eric, your organization, you're a full-time dev or in-house dev?
Essentially an in-house dev, yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And you're at a university that specializes in film, is it, or?
Yeah, my specific location only has a few programs that are film and broadcasting and animation, graphic design. So very, very focused on the film side of things. And so I'm essentially the technologist for the entire building because we're relatively small, but I do a lot of FileMaker work there to help manage like our gear checkout process, our equipment, our cameras, and that kind of thing, or room rental reservations and those kinds of things. And so this is the next project.
You guys already currently have BettterForms you're using for a bunch of different things now?
Yeah, we use it for a few different just one-off forms, and I also have a site called Gear Guru. That's kind of the spinoff of Gear Guru became Submit Guru. And Gear Guru is the equipment reservation system and the room rental system where it's kind of a calendar management. Yeah.
Cool.
But that's not that's like a BettterForms. That side of BettterForms was just a public portal for our students to get web access without paying all the web direct fees for extra licensing. But Submit Guru is a fully intended to be a fully vertical app where you can sign in or sign up for a new account without a FileMaker license, right? This is all just running on my FileMaker server. I hosted on AWS, that kind of thing. So should I dive into the app, or do you want to see more?
Yeah, no, that's good. That's great. Thank you. Okay. And guys, if you have questions, by all means, just jump right in, right? So.
Yeah. So, okay, so I'll just log in. Well, before I log in, I'll show you. So I built this nice interface where it shows the submitters or the judges. If you click on this, they'll be able to just enter their email, and it sends them a link with a token. So they don't even have to log in with a password, because we want it to be as simple as possible for anyone. No, like the lowering the barrier of entry for all these people that you're asking to use your app, I think is a key.
These are now that you're trying to lower the entry barrier, the friction to use the app for the people who are volunteering their time mostly.
Mostly, yeah. So right, the judges, and once I go through the process, the judges, like, they'll get an email saying, "Hey, it's time for you to judge," and they'll just click a button, and immediately it'll pop up with all the things that they need to judge, and they don't have to log in. It's just through their email. So it feels like a public form, but it's still customized and captures that data. The sign up form, I've also designed that to be pretty simple. So this whole process gets your account set up. So I just kind of wanted to show that, but we can go back, and I'll actually just log into my existing account. Right. So this is kind of the main page. And I'm still working on, I'll probably redesign little bits of this here and there, but the main page where you can manage your new entries, other than approve for judging and send to judges. One cool feature I want to show here is throughout the app, there's lots of opportunities where someone using the app might need to send an email to the judges or the students or the submitters or whatever. And so I've built kind of a card email client where I've got that HTML kind of like editor here. And as you type, it'll actually show you the preview of what email are you about to send out, right? So I'm going to just stay here.
Yeah. So what are you using? There's an editor you're using on the rich text editor on the left-hand side.
This is the Quill editor.
Right. So that's a BettterForms. That's a native BettterForms component. But you can actually use almost any third-party JavaScript editor. Then there's pretty much probably about 24 of them that are popular. But the Quill one is actually built in.
Yeah, this is just the built-in one where I put all this, and then I'd even have merge variables here. So if I want to customize the email for name, full, I enter these here, and I even customize these elements a little bit. So these are actually, you can't tell, but these are actually input fields with a special property on them, so that when you click on it, it selects the whole thing, easy to copy.
Oh, I see. So that way, and you're using that for like copying, or are you copying that onto the, right?
Exactly. So if I want to put the name last up here, I could just copy that there, and then it merges that in my preview.
Now, how is the preview working? So you have HTML on the top left here, which is going into the back end, I guess, when you change something, or?
Yeah. So this, first of all, there's a debounce method on these inputs, and so even if I change these.
So just for the people who aren't familiar with some of this stuff, I'm just going to interject here. So debounce is basically what's happening here is Eric's using a JavaScript editor. So just to remind everybody, this is a web app that's powered by FileMaker. So FileMaker is in the back end powering this entire app, which it totally does not feel like FileMaker. But it still has the simplicity of the logic in behind. So this rich text editor, this Quill editor, which Quill is the library name, and you're using that. It's pushing the HTML to the back end, but so that you don't overwhelm FileMaker with every time you hit a key, you're burdening FileMaker. There's no reason for that. You have some throttling on there or debouncing, and that just means that you're limiting the amount of rate of calls that you're doing to FileMaker. So what are you doing, like every couple seconds kind of thing?
Right. It's whenever you stop typing for 2 seconds is when it makes the call to FileMaker. And that's where you'll see that this kind of spins. Like you can see as I stop typing, it says loading, and then it refreshes. Now the cool thing about this is actually calling. I mean, I could render it directly in BettterForms, but this is actually loaded within an iframe, which is an HTML element that kind of loads a separate website within your website. And the reason I'm doing that is because the HTML that this is coming back from is actually coming from my email service. So I use the email service I'm using is called Mailgun, and they have an API where I can pass them parameters, and I can say I want to pass, this is my title, this is my HTML, this is my button, my link, etc. And it'll return back HTML.
So it renders it, yeah, or
so it renders the HTML,
it, I guess,
and this is exactly the HTML that's going to be sent out in the email. So pixel perfect, CSS perfect. This is a pretty accurate email. No matter what other CSS changes I make to my app, this email is going to be kind of independent of that. And that's kind of the reason why I'm doing it that way. So and of course, I have a button to send a test email because some people just want that peace of mind anyway. But so yeah, that's kind of, and this whole card is universal through many different aspects of where you might send an email. So I just finished this morning where if you want to see who you're sending the email to, you can click on this and it'll flip your preview over to a list of names and emails that says here's who you're about to send to, just so there's even more transparency there. So they understand that's just the users. And I can go back to my preview and reload it. And if it doesn't work, there it is.
So would they, this is just for a general email that they're sending to, and they would save this template, or this is just a one-off kind of thing?
So you could save, what it does is it saves these fields into their account so that every time you load this, it'll remember what you personalized the email to be. But I believe I also have, if I make that nothing, if I take all this out, I have a default template so that you're never sending a blank email. So,
right.
So yeah, this is kind of.
Now, how do you said you're using, Mailgun?
Yes.
Right. And what's their free, like there's so many of these mail things, right? And I'm sure everybody in our group here is like uses a different one. I've used SendGrid and, MailChimp and things like that. Is there a particular advantage to them? I haven't done an API with them yet.
Mailgun has 10,000 emails per month for free is the main one. Their API is pretty good and I like their interface too, but the fact that if I'm only going to be sending transactional emails and not marketing emails, I'm not going to hit that limit,
Right.
And if I do, it's very, very cost effective to go beyond it. So that's the main reason for that. And you just verify your domain with them. And so if I really wanted to get fancy, they have APIs for even adding domains too. So if I really wanted to get fancy and I wanted to offer a feature to an end client that says send from your email domain, I could bring all that into my app and I could push that up to Mailgun and say, hey, use this domain for sending emails instead of submitguru.net. And then it could send from someone else's domain, even through my account. So
sweet.
Yeah, that's the main reason there. Let's move on from email though. That was enough time there. Let's see. The other cool thing, so I'll jump into this for a second. So, and I got to talk a little bit about the flow of how all this process works. So you have new entries that are submitted. There's a process where an admin might want to confirm that it meets all the criteria and that it's in the right category and that kind of thing. And so once everything is confirmed and submitted, they have to manually approve these things within the different categories. And I don't have a lot of test data, I guess, to show that. But once it's approved, then you send it to judges, right? And so all of this data, before you make that push the big button that says send to judges, you're going to want to check that data to say, how much am I asking each judge to watch? And so I've broken out in this summary table, right? I've got within each category, what's the total duration, how many entries are there, and how many judges are there.
So they're primarily uploading video files.
Primarily,
right? Yeah. Video files, and then the judges are going to consume the video files, and you're setting, you want to make sure that the judge actually watches the stuff and doesn't just and do 5 seconds and I didn't like the intro or something like that, and then just move off.
You also want to make sure that if you're asking a judge to watch 4 hours worth of content, maybe you give them a little bit more of a gift card than the other people. I don't know.
Right, I see.
That kind of a thing that it's good to know. I really like you might, because within the schools too, they may not have everything be judged because there's just no time. So that's what this is for. But if you think about how you'd have to do this in FileMaker, this is really what I want to get at, is first of all, calculating the duration is its own thing. And that's actually done through another API. I'm storing all the files on Amazon S3. And so I have a Lambda function out there that as a new video comes in, it can actually pull the metadata and figure out how long the video is. So it stores that as a number of seconds, right? But I have to per category, I have to pick out which one of all my submissions. I want to get a count per category of every approved entry. And then I also want to look through my judges, and I want to say which of them are assigned to this category and are also active themselves. So it's a rather complex thing to build. But I've built this entirely using JavaScript in the browser so as not to overload FileMaker. So my data structure in FileMaker is extremely lean, is what I would say. I'm only storing a table of judges, a table of submissions with some data, some JSON data around each of those things. And then when this loads, instantly it'll calculate all these numbers and display them.
So this is a really good example of when you should, in terms of design pattern, when you should pass stuff off and offload it from FileMaker. Let FileMaker store the main data and do the calculations it absolutely needs to do. But if there's an on-the-fly type calculation and your data is in JSON, the browser can do it like blisteringly fast. It can sort humongous, 10,000 items in a half a second kind of thing, and it can just do stuff that you just can't do in any other system. And because everybody's running the browser in their own computer, that makes it scalable. So I think it's a great strategy for that. What are you using what libraries, or are you using just pure JavaScript, or what are you using to build that, to calculate those numbers and things?
So this is primarily using the Lodash library, which is included with BettterForms, to do something. You can, I don't know if it's in this table, but there's one place on the app where I'm using an intersection, I believe. So you can actually take two arrays of objects, and you can do an intersection between them that says, I only want to match if these things are aligned. And then I just get a dot length. So I say, how long is this array? How many items are in this array, to get numbers. And then duration is just, so some of these are simple. I can say for each category, I can filter the array and then get a summary, summarize all the numbers. I'm also using the numeral.js library included with BettterForms to display the timestamp like this.
Numeral, Numeral is a JavaScript library. It's really popular. There's about 3 libraries that are Numeral and Currency, and there's one other one, I forget what it is. And they all are basically designed to take any format of any of whatever the entity is, numbers, for example, and convert it to any other format. And it's really, really super, super powerful. So you don't have to worry about, what format is my FileMaker sending it in. You literally just say, hey, this data coming in is hours, days, years, and this is the data I want to go out, and it just takes care of it like magic.
So I'm storing data as seconds and then converting it this way, exactly.
Somebody asked, can you explain what the elements at the top are, like the draft, submit, confirmed? Are they for just education to teach the user what those are, or are they buttons? Or
yeah, these are not buttons. So these are the 6 different phases of statuses that a submission will go through. This is like one of the first pages I built. I haven't gotten around to redesigning it yet because I do think I'll probably hide these and show them when they're necessary or add them to the documentation. But that was kind of, I did want something at the beginning to say, you're going to go from these things, and here's when you see, for example, in here, you see I've got the tags here. And so I wanted some color corrections. You can see, what does that mean? Oh, it means this up here, kind of thing. So, yeah.
So that's what's up. I think we've all kind of fallen into that. You start building something, and then you start putting this on here, and then it just stays there. It gets kind of grandfathered in until you realize, or until somebody asks about it, and then it's like, oh yeah, I got to change that or do this or do whatever. And that's what we were talking about last week. Is if you haven't worked with a designer before, just try it. Just try it once for your next big project. And I can point you to 5 different FileMaker developers who have actually done that. And they're all advocates, they're sort of sworn believers, because there's no more thinking about that kind of stuff. It's already pre-done for you. And as an example of that, and somebody just mentioned it earlier on today, is we have a video series where I am building a florist delivery app. It's a mobile app. And that was designed by Fred Illies, who was in our group last week, and he's in the group today too. And he presented last week. And it's a one-to-one time of me building the app. Now, I'm fairly proficient at building things, in fairness, but you can see I've put exactly 4.5 hours into the app. So it's a half a day's work, roughly, and how far it's come along. And then you're going to watch the whole app. I'm going to be building it out over the next month and a half or so, and you'll be able to see that whole process. And that's all in our video library.
So I'm gonna, if I switch real quick, I'm just gonna blaze through this. I'm gonna switch to my other contests where I've already got where I've got these other half. I've already sent this to judges, for example. And I just want to show, this is another example of some FileMaker tricks where I'm calculating these numbers and these categories. These are summaries based on a drop-down menu, and it recalculates the entire table based on which attributes you're judging against. And so if you'll let me jump to the settings real quick, actually I need to switch back because I can't edit while I'm in judging mode. But if you see, when you're defining these categories, I can say I want to judge based on multiple things. And so this one's got a few different items. And so it's that kind of flexibility that I needed to build in to say each category might have a different method of judging, different ways to judge things. And so I would need to show in the results, I would need to show different columns for that. So you can sort by, well, who had the best editing score, who had the best sound design score, or who had the most overall score, if you have multiple things. It's just one of those things that I feel like people try to do these kind of things in FileMaker, and I've given up. I said I'm going to do it in the browser to display that data in a different way.
And in fairness, there's so many things that we can do in FileMaker. It's just so easy, like relationships and pulling data. It's just, that's what FileMaker eats for breakfast, like pulling, cascading, a bunch of tables and pulling the data from the whole thing. So
hey, what about doing that in the web browser within FileMaker, so you're not popping out there to build the email?
Certainly. Oh yeah, certainly. So there's lots of tools in FileMaker where you're building. You could do the same kind of thing even without BettterForms, is what you're trying to say. Yeah. So you could build something within a web viewer and have, using the FileMaker web viewer bridge, you could send data back and forth. But the difference is this is entirely in a browser because I don't want to have FileMaker licenses to send out to.
Well, the scale, it's not feasible, right? It's not the sweet spot for FileMaker, but it is a sweet spot for FileMaker as a source of business logic and as a database. So now we're decoupling the front end from the back end. And you could have, if you had, let's say, even just 20 active running organizations, that could be 300 or 400 users. If their deadline was, if their submissions open on Monday at 9 a.m. and closed at Friday at 5 p.m., it could be huge spikes in your concurrency. So
yeah, David.
You really do need a web app for that.
Excuse me. Potentially in a scenario where you might already have all the FileMaker licenses, but you just want the increased flexibility and power that BettterForms or web code can give you. Does BettterForms support doing all of this inside a web viewer in a FileMaker?
That's a great question. So it's like a hybrid design. Absolutely, you can do that. You could run this in a web browser, and it would run, or a web viewer, I should say, in FileMaker in a layout, and it would run exactly the same.
Yeah. So maybe, for example, you could have a master detail view, portal of records down the side, but the detail section could be from BettterForms, right? Yeah,
you can do that. We currently don't have a public native interface, but we do have one that we can configure a file as an example for that, but it's not in our docs. And that's what I mean by that is it's a direct communication between BettterForms and the client versus BettterForms and the server. This application is talking to FileMaker server, And if it was in a client, you'd want it to talk to that particular active session, especially if you're interaction between, those master detail links. You want to click on a link and see something change in the guts of the page. So it's a slightly different configuration. It's like a hybrid view, and our helper file is actually doing that. If anybody who does use BettterForms, there's a helper file which acts as an inbox and a proxy to the outside world. And the home page is actually a BettterForms app, and it's an example of a hybrid app.
Yeah, that's where you've got you're using that FMP protocol or whatever it is. And
it doesn't even need to do that for the most part, because most of its function is connecting to the BettterForms server, the application server, versus your client. So it can give you up-to-date news and say, hey, this file's out of date and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But that's what you're trying to talk about, is if you were to implement this directly into a FileMaker file, you probably would want to use the FMP URL scheme. And BettterForms does not use that. It uses a backend XML gateway to FileMaker server.
Yeah, but we do have some bridge code that's actually in the it's just not public. But there is some bridge code that you can actually work a true hybrid app. It's just not fully developed, that's all. Or at least the API is not flexible enough for everybody.
Which doesn't rely on the FMP protocol?
It does. It does rely on parts of that, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, seems like nobody's yet solved the problem of if you've got 2 or 3 copies of FileMaker running on your computer, the FMP protocol doesn't know which one to talk to.
Yeah, but the only people who have that are developers,
Yeah.
Otherwise it's just, sloppy application management, so.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's cool. All right, thanks for
Eric, this is Mark speaking. So it looks really great. I really love what you're doing here, and it seems to me that I could easily see it overtaking the FileMaker side, where you just say, well, let's just, how much of the back end do I even want to do in FileMaker anymore? Because you're building all this stuff. It's here. I mean, do you find yourself thinking, why don't I just use this for my entryway in as well? I mean, how much, now that you've got this going, how much is left for you to do in pure FileMaker?
That's a great question. The thing is, with any application, you always need a backend of some kind. So and there's backends in all kinds of languages. If you're using Python, PHP, even JavaScript can be its own backend. But you need a backend that's totally separate from the front end in many ways anyway. And so everything running on FileMaker is the data structure and the scripting engine. So I am still using all of FileMaker's scripting features to run a lot of these things. The only thing I'm not doing is I'm not making any layouts in FileMaker. Right?
That's what I'm wondering. You're not building, so really you're not building any interfaces in FileMaker anymore.
I'm not.
It all here.
No, in fact, even my admin interface, I was wondering if I'd have a chance to show this too. So I have an admin interface that I built in BettterForms that is my backend to this, and this even gives a couple extra features. Yeah, so if I'm managing, for developing, I pull up some list views, but if a customer calls me and says I need support, I can go right in and I can log in as them using this button.
Oh, that's cool.
I've got that whole token-based email thing, and now I'm logged in as a different user.
Right, so you get their exact experience. Brilliant.
And I get and all the calls now go back and forth between their account. And actually, he doesn't have any data, so maybe if I log in as a judge, I'm not sure. I'll just keep testing these things, because judges it'll see like which entries do they have, and so he doesn't have any entries here. But I can be able to see, and it's been really, this part has been great for me to be able to test and say, how are other users going to see my app? But yeah, even just, so I've got a couple other, so the default templates, like I talked about, I've built my own little email thing here, where I can edit this thing, but they can't, but this will save back to my FileMaker database. So I've got a few different email templates that way, and I can edit contests, and I can look at different contests and their JSON and that kind of thing. So
and maybe a little later on we can touch base on that ham groups there too, because I think that's a whole separate discussion. But we'll let you. We'll save that for later. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, it looks really nice. I have one more question for you. So,
sure.
Having not used BetterForms myself, and I know a little bit about it, but can you reuse elements as easily as you can in FileMaker, like duplicating layouts and stuff like that, copy paste a bunch of fields down? I mean, when you're building these things, are you just swapping out, like, okay, I got a great form here, I want to use it for something else, wham bam, make another form, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, there's a lot of copy paste to it, depending on how deep the customization you want to get, but it's all JSON based. So especially if you're familiar with reading and managing JSON, I could show a page like this if you, I don't know if that'll be helpful or not, but I can show like the back end of this settings page, but it'll probably look overwhelming if you've never seen it before. So I don't know if I should pull it up.
For just to interject a bit, you can duplicate pages. It would be the equivalent of duplicating a layout in FileMaker, and you can cut and paste the schema, which is the design of the guts of the page, just like you would in anything else. As far as naming an element, like if Eric wanted to call this a configuration panel, and that would go from that general up at the top up down to, but not including the submission and rules. So that panel right in there. If he wanted to make that an element, we don't currently have a component like that where he can say, I want this to be a component, and then it can centrally control it. But we are in the process of actually designing. First, we're going to design the interface and how it would work, and then we'll design the back end to drive the interface. And we are in the process of doing that. So components are on the near roadmap, not the far roadmap. And it's going to be super, super exciting because the component will consist of different elements, right, and you'll be able to centrally, you'll be able to share them. So if you say, hey, Eric, I really love this configuration panel with the tag at the top and the slidery thing in the middle with the storage and everything like that, can you share that? And he'll be able to hit publish, and you'll be able to take that code and literally pop it into your application.
But even FileMaker can't do something like that now. I mean, you can have themes. You can have themes, and you can share. You can give things the same styles. But that's no different than just adding a class to CSS and applying the same styles that way too. So, yeah. But the components feature, that's something I've always wanted in FileMaker, like a shared layout parts or something. If you have a shared header across every page, that kind of thing. So yeah, that is exciting to go through. Is there anything else I should go through? I mean, you've seen the basics of the app for the most part.
How does the upload work?
Okay, yeah, upload goes. So I've mentioned that I'm storing all the files on Amazon S3, and the way that I've configured the upload to work, it actually uploads directly from the browser to S3. So I've configured everything. I don't want to show you a live upload because I don't think I'll have enough bandwidth to. And now I've got to log out of Jim Bob and log back in as me since I did that. So 1 second there. So if I were to go
pretty fast. Sorry.
So if I were to go, actually, let me just do it. I can show you part of the process. I just don't want to actually upload it. So if I upload files here, it'll show you. You can select a video and do that here. And then it shows you a preview loading from S3, the video thumbnail. But again, that's all up. And so let me back up again. So you select a file. Like I'll click this. It opens a file picker. Where I can select an image or a video or a document in whatever case. It'll go directly to S3. When the upload is complete from the browser to S3, then S3, the JavaScript SDK from Amazon, says, okay, I'm done. And then that triggers a callback to FileMaker with a URL saying, here is the location of that file.
How's that callback working? Like, how does it work?
It's just a regular BettterForms hook. So
just to fill people in, so BettterForms has a built-in REST API, so you can it's like an endpoint. And Fred talked a little bit about it, or I talked about it last week. And basically, the concept is every BettterForms application also has a built-in API, so you can use that for callbacks from Stripe. Or last week, Fred was using it to push things from his mobile app into the cloud app, and so on. So that's that, and you're using that same callback method from.
That's cool.
I'm using that and the regular hook. So every time I click save, that's running a script in FileMaker, basically. So when the browser page knows when an upload is done, and so it'll call FileMaker. But I'm also using some Lambda functions in Amazon that say, that are directly, it's triggered to S3 events. Amazon has a whole feature where you can say, when something in my bucket has changed, call a webhook. And so it's also doing that, which is important in my app because I need to know how many, like if you saw the file storage thing, I need to know how much file storage each user is using in my S3 bucket because I'm going to bill against that. So it's kind of redundant, but it's designed that way so that in case anything breaks during an upload, you still have a file stored on my server that I'm still going to charge you for that until you delete it or something. You know, just that way I can keep a better. I want to have my numbers match. You know. So yeah.
Yeah, cool.
And
what kind of,
actually, I can show you the import too real quick. So this piece here is using another library for a CSV parser, which is something that we've always wanted in FileMaker. And if I download my sample CSV, and I'm just going to upload it right back up. So I'll just drag this back into my drag and drop. This parses the CSV and adds a user instantly to my user account.
Why does it add a user?
So I was importing users from a CSV.
Oh, okay. It's because it's importing the judges, right? I see.
So it's importing. You download a sample, you can fill it all out with your users, and then drag and drop it. If I do it again, it won't show you the difference because it's already there, unless I find.
So I think the idea of downloading a sample is a great idea because then there's no confusion.
Right.
We recently built something for importing random shaped Excel files, like they're all different shaped, kind of, they're all, roll your own kind of file. And it's the same type of an idea, but instead this one, you select the columns and I want to omit these lines and keep these lines and that kind of stuff. So you're pretty flexible on building that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I'm going to have to add eventually, but for now, the sample is what I'm working on.
How does the judging work?
So I don't know that I have a great way to show that to you, but it's like I said in the beginning. So if you send to judges, judges will get an email. They'll click that email, and it's just as easy as when I clicked login as. It's basically them doing that exact same thing. They have a token that's stored on the FileMaker server with an expiration date that says you can use this token, and if it's passed in the query parameter or stored in a cookie in their browser, it'll recognize them. And then they don't have to log in, and it'll be able to tie back every action that they do to their stuff. But it's essentially, it's just a simple form where they have a slider that says 0 to 100 on each of the categories you define. They can click the video, and they can watch it, and they can add notes, and then they can submit. So I don't know if that answers your question. I see Fred has his hand up too. So.
Yeah, nothing urgent, but I did have a question for you. If you can go back to your main screen.
Yeah.
The question was around the upper left-hand corner. You've got something that says active contest. What happens when you click on that?
So because you could run multiple contests, and so this is where I would make a new contest, or I could switch between multiple ones.
So do your users see this? Do your users? So if I'm a judge and I come in here, let's say I'm one of your clients. And I have a school that has a contest, or I'm a film festival, and I want to come in and manage my film festival using your Submit Guru app. So is that in the case where my film festival might have multiple contests?
Right, or even multiple years, right? So it might be last year's contest or 3 years ago. So exactly. Okay. So it's designed to, that's why I put it, you can name it whatever, right? But it's just like multiple things. And that's the other piece that I've designed the pricing model. It's not fully fleshed out yet, but I've designed it around a one-time fee per contest, so that for schools that only need it once a year, they pay once. If you want to run contests all year long, you can pay all year long. So yeah, and so whenever you make a new contest, it tracks it that way, and then you can switch between them. The other interesting thing, just if you're using BettterForms and you're curious about how I got some of this to work, so you'll notice when I switch contests, the background refreshes with all the new contest data. And that's because on every single page in my app, I have a named action. that essentially will rerun the on-form request. It'll reload the page. And so I've designed this card modal so that when this card closes, because I could be on any page in my app when I'm switching contests. You notice it's on every page. So when I close this, it actually is going to run that refresh.
So just to interject, a named action for the people who are kind of not familiar with that, it's a script. It's the equivalent of FileMaker's script. We have a concept called actions, which are like script steps in FileMaker. And you can put several actions together. An action might be something like show this card modal, fetch some data, and go to a different page or something like that. And a named action is just a script that is globally accessible, so that you're using basically a script that you can access from anywhere in your app to control something. And by doing that, you're reusing your code, which is a really, really good design pattern.
Yeah, exactly.
Eric, hi, it's Fred again. Sorry, I have one follow-up question, which is not really related to the interface, but related to your SaaS business, because you're talking about your pricing model and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about where you're at in your goal in terms of, you started out with a solution that you built for your own organization, and now you're creating a product and you're trying to sell it as a product to other organizations. I'm involved in something similar with my basketball app where it's working great for my own organization. And the difference between taking something that's custom built for my organization versus making something that's going to be generic enough so that it can be used by a whole bunch of organizations that might have different requirements. I'm still in that phase of trying to really gauge the market and do market research to find other organizations and see what the overlap is, if you will, between what various organizations need. If it's a Venn diagram, here's this organization, here's another one, and wherever the sweet spot is in the middle, that's where I'd like to focus my functionality of my SaaS. Right. So I wanted to understand kind of where you're at in that process for you, like in that journey, if you will.
Yeah, so I'm probably a little bit before where you are in your app, because this is still, I'd call this an alpha stage. It's not been yet deployed even to my own organization, but it's very close. Because of all the coronavirus, we've been saying we're going to need this more than ever, because all our students are at home now. They can't access the file server anymore. So we're about to start testing it internally, but I do have a little bit of an advantage because my university has 2 locations. And so each of our locations does things a little bit differently. So that already I've had to think in more general terms to say, like the categories or how you define things. Even to be able to go into your settings and define the deadlines and the times and those kinds of things. I've already started and your rules and guidelines have to be custom. So I've started doing that already, just because within our organization, we have 2 different groups of people that want to use it. So I'm hoping that after I get this, my plan and my goal is that after I get this working, probably this spring, so typically we do a showcase in May, that after we get this up and running and I've got a full real contest that runs through it, I'll branch out and start to see who else needs, who else I can provide use to this. But I also know that we have some people here that have worked at other film schools that have told me, oh, I wish I had this. So I think I'm on the right track. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Eric, how much time have you put into? When did you start? Let me ask you this better, I think, is when did you start working on this?
Oh, goodness. I wish I'd kept track. It was probably October, maybe, right?
It's because it didn't seem like that long ago. It seemed maybe 5-6 months ago.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't. It doesn't feel like too long either. And even just this page, I mean, a lot of the thought there goes between the back end process and thinking of how to design everything. I mean, I redesigned this page in just a couple hours, this entire page, because I had already done the back end work. So, and that's kind of been more exciting because I enjoy a little bit more of the design aspects where I can make things look nice.
So you never thought you'd become a front end desiginer? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
We're all front end designers now.
Exactly. But Fred inspired me, and I said, well, I was like, I have to redesign my settings page because it looked so bad before. So after seeing his app last week, so
Awesome. Can you show us the back end at all?
The FileMaker backend?
Yeah.
Or it's just scripts, but let me see if I can stop my share. I have a giant 4K monitor, so I'm trying to only show Windows because otherwise you won't be able to read anything. So let me just resize this. Oh, and you probably wanted to talk about ham too. I know you mentioned.
Yeah, we'll jump back to that.
You know what I really love about this so much is I'm not sure, somebody might have mentioned earlier about, potentially why do we need FileMaker at all? I mean, FileMaker's backend has, all the data, just like any SQL server might or whatever else, but all the power of the scripting and everything in FileMaker is where FileMaker is so strong. And the ability here for FM BettterForms to put really awesome, basically JavaScript front end on all that processing. I don't know if simplicity is the word, or it's so much easier to do programming in FileMaker than in any kind of web-based solution or SQL-based solution. That's what I really love about this. I don't know. I just wanted to share that. Somebody mentioned something like that earlier. You can throw an SQL backend on a web database, on a web front end, but it's the scripting that is
Absolutely.
Am I understanding this right?
No, you're bang on with that. There isn't any other environment that really combines a database and a scripting engine, the business logic plus the model, together in one environment. Usually they're separate. You have a database and then you have some code sitting in front, PHP or whatever you're running. So that's where the beauty of FileMaker is, and you're still maintaining compatibility with your legacy system. And BettterForms is not trying to replace WebDirect. A lot of people think it's a competitor to WebDirect. It's not. Most of the people who are using BettterForms, they're using it because they can't use WebDirect. WebDirect just doesn't have the ability. Like, you could see his app, he's flying through back and forth his app. He can hit refresh on any page, right? He can log in, authenticate without tokens, that kind of stuff. He can design his app, and he's not confined to the FileMaker paradigm in terms of front end. He's more confined to what the rest of the world does in terms of front end. He can import libraries that I've never even seen before, kind of thing, and he's just adding those into his architecture. So that's really the scope or the sweet spot for FM BettterForms.
Yeah, FileMaker's layout tools were awesome 20 years ago, but there's such a weakness now, I feel, and I think that's where this.
I think they're still pretty good, to be honest with you. For most,
I agree.
This is better.
Fred, I agree.
But this is better.
They're way behind the rest of the industry now in terms of layout tools. Like the tools that I use to do my designs, like Sketch or InVision Studio or Figma or Adobe XD, those have a much more advanced layout capabilities. And I'd love to see, I'm really hoping to see FileMaker says that they're going to, in their upcoming version, are going to support relative sizing.
Yeah, that's
we're going to be able to get much better responsiveness than we have right now, because in some ways it's really limited in terms of the responsiveness of the current layout tools. Sorry to interject there. I just wanted to say that I definitely agree with you.
Thanks, Fred. Relative sizing is a huge part of it. But even, I don't know, it's so good in that you can drag and drop things and put them where you want them to be, but it's so inflexible. And web development, okay, so you have to write JSON or JavaScript or whatever to, you have to write text code to get a user interface. You can't just drag and drop objects around. But that gives you so much more flexibility. And from what I've seen, I'm still trying to get my teeth into BettterForms, but from what I'm seeing about the way BettterForms does it, it seems to be, it brings some power and simplicity to the complexity of JavaScript code. Again, am I understanding that right?
Yeah, it separates the front end from the back end. So imagine you don't need any back end at all other than utility tables just to look at stuff.
Okay.
Eric, do you have any actual UI much, or just utility UI, developer UI in your backend?
No, absolutely nothing in FileMaker.
What's your, can we see your graph? It's like,
Oh,
you know,
sure. Well,
is that too
shared a different
personal?
window, I think. No, sure. Yeah, you can see it's actually pretty simple. That's a great way to see it. Yeah. Well, maybe it's not. So I've got two different, let's see.
While you're doing that,
Right, here it comes.
about context. So in FileMaker, scripts are always based on your context, based on layouts. You've got to be on a layout to know where you are. Well, how does that
Yeah, great question.
when that script runs in BettterForms?
Think of BettterForms just wants some data from FileMaker. It doesn't care what layout you're on or anything like that. So it's going to call a script in FileMaker, and it's going to say, here's some data that's on the front end, you know, first name, last name, email address. I don't care what you do with it. I'm just told to call this script when the person pushed the button, and this, so that your script.
And it does pass context. It does pass, like you're able to pass things like, here's the page I'm on in BettterForms, but
yeah, but there's no it's not context like from a layout, like you're not sitting on your company's table or anything. So this is your entire app here.
Yes. And so I've got a couple different groups. This is my selector connector table, and I've got a deleter group if I'm deleting things. And then this is kind of just for my own mind. There's a few calculations that run based on these like business relationships, you could say. And then I've got some standalone tables where I'm storing emails, or I'm storing the login token, and it's just separate standalone table. I'm going to go look that up.
Which is interesting because normally in a normal app, you don't usually have too many tables that are totally standalone or autonomous like that, right? Everything's connected because you need to see that data in FileMaker. And no matter where you are in FileMaker, you're on a layout connected to a table of contents, connected to a table, connected to a record. Where BettterForms, you don't have to be.
And even these, I'm not, when I'm looking stuff up, I'm not going to layout and go to related record. I'm performing SQLs that are searching across one relationship. So they're pretty quick. And so like these relationships here are almost not necessary, except that there's a few calculated fields that I found were easier to do via a relationship. And then I'm only calling those calculated fields when I absolutely need them. So it's not even but most of the time I'm just going to say, hey, from the submissions table, give me everything that matches this company or this contest, you know?
Yeah, so that's kind of the heart of what I was asking, which is, in typical FileMaker world, you'd be on a company's layout with a portal to employees, and you click on a row and you go to related record, but you've got to have the layouts to make that work. But in BettterForms, you're just passing, I assume you're just passing an ID and saying, go find me that record.
Yeah, we have this as FileMaker developers, we're so entrenched in the concept of context, and you're sort of in some ways, and it's not too hard to let go, but you'll have to let that go a little bit because it's not needed anymore. It is from the point of running your script and producing or generating your data. But other than that, it's not generally a requirement. You can see how simple his relationship graph is. And with all of those views, that would be a monster in FileMaker.
But I don't see in your scripting scripts that look like my scripts that say, go to layout, go to related record. None of your scripts don't start from that contextual place.
So I do have a go to layout within a database transaction script, but it goes to the selector layout and that's it.
I think he means for navigation.
Oh,
front end navigation.
Navigation and passing data from one place to another, but yeah.
We
No,
still need context for I don't know, anything that we do want to use FileMaker scripting for.
Absolutely, yeah.
Still need the context for that though, right?
Like here, right? What the screen you're looking at here. This is a list view, I assume, of submissions. Right. Yeah,
maybe Eric, you could show us how a simple list view and grabbing the data for list view works.
You want me to do that in BettterForms, or
just a concept? If you want to just kind of run through, like, if you have an example, so, if you have a real simple one that's like just a quick get column from an ID, and then
a script wise for that. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So
the script for that page there, for example.
Okay, so let me go back to this sharing. So if I am pulling up in BettterForms, here are all your hooks. So everything in this folder is a hook from BettterForms. This is the initial script that'll get called. And so if I am on the admin users, right? The on form request, which is run when it loads, it just says, it first checks, do you have permission? And then it loads everything from the database, and it says, push those into the model. So pretty simple. And then if I want to open something, what it does is it opens a new layout. And so it'll run this on form request, the card layout. First it checks, do you have permission? So we'll get to that later. And then it from the query, so in your parameter, it's passing in an ID. And it says if it's not empty, then I'm going to do an SQL. I'm going to get the as JSON field, which is just my JSON representation of that record that matches the ID. And if that is empty, then I'm going to hide the modal, and I'm going to show an error. Sorry, I couldn't find that, right? But otherwise, I'm going to set this global variable, which is how BettterForms very easily from FileMaker passes data back to the browser. And it says I'm going to set into the model the user object that I got from my SQL. And this is here. If it's not empty, I'm just going to, if I don't.
How do you change your screen? How do you change where you end up? You're going to a different screen after you touch something, right?
In this example, he's showing a card modal. So a card window.
Oh,
so he's just hiding on line 27, he's hiding the card modal. He's fetching the data in 25, which is the key thing here. So he's using a custom function called getColumn, which is an SQL wrapper, and it's returning all of the data. 95% of your queries you ever do in FileMaker are a go-to record, right? You want to find a specific record or a found set based on a common parent ID foreign key. So most of that lends itself super easy to execute SQL, and it's super performant too. A lot of people think, oh no, it's not going to be, but it actually works really well because they're not really complex queries.
Eric, maybe you can show Mark a path action. I think maybe that's what he's asking about, how you go to another form.
Right. Okay.
So I do have that here. No, that's hide. So
I think maybe on the front end, Eric, might be better. Just I don't know if you have something on the front end, but then you have to change screens again. So
I don't use. The thing is, I don't use path actions very much, but there is a way you can switch, like your URL would be redirecting. Yeah.
So there's a function if you want FileMaker to decide. So there's two scenarios when you're going to change where you are, your context, if you will. Let's say I'm on a home page and I want to go to a detail page. I may want to do that from the front end. So I click a button in the navigation that says, show me the contacts. And I want the front end to navigate to the list view. And there's other times when you want the back end to say, no, this is bad. I need to take the user somewhere else. So both of those are controlled through basically a single line of code in FileMaker or in the front end.
Here's an example on the back end where I'm setting the VF actions. So I'm saying the server is going to implement an action of path, navigate to this page.
Right, but you're never going to layout.
No.
There's really no corollary in the FileMaker backend to.
Remember, layouts are a user interface thing. They're not a database thing. Layouts are purely UI. You can have databases. Every database has no layouts, right? That's a construct for the user interface. So it's not necessary because BettterForms replaces that.
But there's still a context thing though for scripting though.
Right, there is, but most of the time he's using a SQL query here. So that gets rid of that context too.
So I do have for these scripts.
Wrap my brain around the fact that a FileMaker script is context independent. It's like goes against everything.
No, it's not entirely. I have this go to layout. This makes you feel better, but I'm always going to my selector layout. I'm always going to one layout where I will set data through a relationship. So, and that's what this is. So my starting transaction script, which actually comes from the Carbon framework, is where a lot of this was, the backend was based on. And so I'll go to, now I closed it. So if so this is just a simple, when I'm confirming the entry, it passes in, it's an API script. So this is, again, doesn't have any interface to it, but it's just saying, start the transaction, pick out this thing and set this field, right? It's a very simple script.
Yeah, set field, you have to be somewhere, you just happen to be everywhere.
Right, so, but that's where I've got these separated.
Right.
So I've got an API folder, that's my backend API into my FileMaker database. But down here is the API between FileMaker and BettterForms. And this is where I store all of the things such as If I want to show an error or if I want to redirect the user to a page, that's all user interface stuff. And then my database stuff is separated here, or my email notification logic is in these set of scripts.
This is using a concept that we can talk about in another meet if we want. Basically, it's API first design. And just a quick abstract, it's the idea is that if you have something that updates a record, I got to update my client contact with a new email address. Instead of doing a go-to layout and directly mutating that record via at the UI would pass some data that says the new first name is John, and it would call a script, an API script, an interface script. Then that script would mutate the record. And the reason you use that kind of concept is later on when Eric's system grows and he may want some other third-party external interface into his system that needs to update it, like Slack or something like that needs to update data within his system, he can call that same script. He's not relying on the layout anymore. So he's abstracted the layout, the direct coupling in FileMaker. Don't forget the coupling between the UI and the database is tightly, it's top to bottom integration. But when you separate those, now you can have other things jack in on either end. You can replace the front end with BettterForms, and you can replace the back end if he ever wants to as well. If he was to ever outgrow FileMaker for his use case, he can still have that he can still have the ability to do that, and even in stages by having this API first design.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's something I've been exploring with the company I've been working with, because they're looking like their user base is going to grow so much that FileMaker won't be able to support it. So I'm recommending that they start by building the front end with either JavaScript or Vue or FM BettterForms if I can get them to buy it. And then phase once that's all done, then we can look at figuring out how to flip out the back end. And that's a question I wanted to ask you. FM BettterForms is obviously designed specifically for FileMaker, but could it plug into another backend if the company wants to go that way?
Yeah, it absolutely could, and really easy, but there's a fundamental problem with 90% of backend, well, 99% of backends is there's no business logic in them, right? Most backends don't have any business logic. So that means you need some middleware business logic, which means some type of Lambda function type idea where you're passing code into there. So it's a brand new technology that a developer would have to learn.
Which is essentially all what FileMaker provides with the scripting, right? Correct.
FileMaker is a beautiful match in that regard.
So maybe it'd be a 3-stage process, replace the front end with FM BettterForms, then replace all the scripts.
To be honest with you, I would say, why do you need to replace FileMaker? Because if you're replacing FileMaker because of there's cruft in your system and it's laggy and deployment and all those things are all resolved. You can see you saw with Eric's app, all of those issues are already resolved.
It's because the user base is currently 250, but in 2 years it's going to be 2,000.
Right. So we have some users. We actually Colleen's on the line, and she's not the highest number of users. I think Jesse, who's also on this call, is the highest number of users. But Colleen just deployed an app about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, and it had the highest number of concurrent transactions like per minute coming through. So much, in fact, that we had to scale up one of the backend servers to support it. And maybe we can even talk about that app in a future call. That might be a good separate topic.
Charles, it's Fred. Quick
in a nutshell, though, how do you get FileMaker to support 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 users? If
you pass on most of the CPU cycles to something else. That's in a nutshell.
We have about 5,000 users, not concurrent, but 5,000 people that use BettterForms.
If you think about BettterForms, it's a web app, so it's HTTP stateless technology. So it's not like FileMaker where you have a constant connection to the server. In a web page, you call it for something and then you're done. So it does allow for a much wider scale than you're typically thinking of when you talk about FileMaker performance, because if everybody's running a FileMaker client, that is a hefty connection for the server to manage constant connections with 2,000 people. That doesn't work very well.
Okay, so so there might be 5,000 users, but over the course of even a 10-minute period, maybe only 300 will hit it at once.
Yeah, you can look at some, if you think of the workload like this, FileMaker can say consistently handle at the very, very split second, the true concurrent actions threads on a medium-sized server, about 2025. Right now, that action only is transitional, so it only lasts for, say, 16, 100 milliseconds, somewhere in that range typically. So even if it was 100 milliseconds, now and every user did one transaction per second. That's already 300 users. How many times are you clicking once per second in your app? Virtually never, right? You have maybe a couple click, 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 and I'm here, and now I'm doing some data entry. So that's how you can get some accurate scalability numbers.
So
Eric, can you jump into, sorry to just cut this thread. I just want to get back on track a little bit because we're going to be tight on time. And there's something that's really, really key is ham. I think you were going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can mention that briefly.
And then maybe we can return to scaling and things like that down towards the end of the call.
So here is so ham is, we just gave it the fun hammy name because it stands for Headless Authorization Module. And so the idea is that because all my web users don't have a FileMaker user account, nor do I want to make them a FileMaker user account for every new user that signs up, I still need a way of determining who they are and what they can do, right? So BettterForms already provides the interface of authorizing users, authenticating users, which is who you are, right? So I know that Charles is Charles, I am Eric, and Fred is Fred, and so on, right? But what you can do kind of needs to be built in. So we built, I built with Charles this feature called ham, which is a set of custom functions in FileMaker that abstracts this JSON that defines privileges of what you can do. And then you may have seen within FileMaker, within one line, I can say, hey, check the privilege. Does the user have the privilege to edit a company, right? Yes or no. Or it can be a number, or, so in this case, I'm also storing my plans in this. So if I want to say that you're allowed to have 100 gigabytes, that'll be a number field. And it's just going to be looking up that value. And so without going into too incredibly much detail, what I have here, if you look at the plans as a simple example, I have a free plan that has some stuff. And then I have a basic plan that is inheriting from that plan, and the unlimited plan, which is inheriting from that plan. And so all of that is done through the FileMaker custom function when you initially set this up, and it'll build out a flat object that then later you can just do basically a JSON get element to say, what is this value for this thing that inherited all these things. And that keeps all your privileges kind of separated and easy to manage. So I can just overwrite them as the plan increases, or for an admin or a user, if they share privileges and you have cascades, but it makes it really flexible. That's kind of a really dirty overview. I didn't practice that either, or a presentation, but.
Yeah, that's okay. I think so. Just to fill in a couple blanks, the whole goal of ham is that it's a headless authorization module, and headless means it doesn't have a UI. And if it doesn't have a UI, that means it's not bound to a particular environment. It's a concept rather than an implementation. And we needed something. Originally, I needed something for BettterForms because we have subscriptions and all kinds of things. This person can do this and that person can do that. And we needed we needed a flexible system that can grow in the future. And we can say later on, you have this plan, but you bought this add-on. And you bought this add-on, and then another customer may come up to me and say, hey, can you make a special exception just for me? Well, those special exceptions normally in most architectures are almost impossible, or you have to add a ton of craft. So we needed a system that can handle that stuff. So a typical use case, and this is how we use it in BettterForms underneath the hood, is you have a base plan, for example, and that plan has certain attributes. Eric's attributes might be storage 1 gigabyte, but the next plan after that, or the free plan, the next plan has a storage of gigabytes of 30 gigabytes. And there's a very key important thing here in line 6. It says inherit. So it inherits all of the other attributes from the lower level of plan. And when you do that, that means you can also inherit specific plans for organizations. So I can go in and say, I want this organization to have 60 gigabytes for whatever reason. Maybe for customer service or something like that, you made a special exception. And I want this user of this organization. So that's another level above that. That particular user, I want them, if they're using a system, they have 100 gigabytes. And Ham can handle that all seamlessly. And you need to do authorization in two places. You need to do it on the back end always, because the front end in any browser, including, it doesn't matter what it is hackable, right? You can Command Option J and look underneath the hood and see all the code and all the data in the browser. So that means anything that you're relying on the front end to do, it's totally hackable. But if you, on the entry point, and Eric showed this earlier on, the entry point for your script, if you add a simple command, in this case, it's Ham's distilled down into 3 custom functions. So it's super easy to integrate. You can use as little as much as you want in your system. And it can quickly check that user through their organization and through their privilege set and all the inheritances of that, and see if that user is authorized to do whatever function. If not, you redirect them to a paywall, or you tell them a message or something like that. Otherwise, you continue on. So it's super easy to add authorization into your vertical app. And then that's normally almost impossible in FileMaker to do. And if anybody's built a vertical app in FileMaker where they have a multi-tenant solution, in other words, in Eric's case, it's multiple organizations running these submissions or these contests, that's virtually impossible to do in FileMaker. It's really, really challenging. Pure innate FileMaker proper, we'll call it. Yeah.
Does that mean that that Ham replaces the need to have any authentication in FileMaker, like users and groups?
So you generally, with BettterForms apps, you're not using FileMaker's native authorization. You're using a single account. And you have a separate table. You're doing table-based accounts. So you have a separate table that's controlling those accounts. And in that table, there's going to be various attributes to either the user or the organization. And you configure those attributes, and then you can authenticate or authorize against those.
Yeah. So thinking about it in terms of my tool right now, because we only have there's very few users who are using the system. I don't have user permissions basically set up.
You don't need to. Yeah, you wouldn't need to.
I know, but when I do, like let's say I want to make this into a multi-tenant solution, could Ham and those custom scripts that are included in Ham mean that I don't have to do all that stuff in FileMaker?
Correct. Yeah, you don't have to you don't have to build any security in your FileMaker database.
Thank you. That's the question.
Yeah, you wouldn't do any of that. Don't have to think about that. You really just need to have an app build.
My app doesn't. It literally has a BettterForms account and my FileMaker root account admin for full access, and that's all it has.
One thing and this goes back to that whole paradigm of thinking about FileMaker and decoupling yourself from the user interface. FileMaker, in terms of a grocery store and shoplifting, is like walking into a Walmart and saying, "Can you stick something in your pocket?" Right? You can, there's cameras on each aisle, but there's always these dead spots, and I can usually get quite a few chocolate bars in there, right? That's a bad joke.
Charles, do we have time to see a quick overview of how the flow?
What I think we'll do is, I think Dan will save that for. I think that was Dan. I think we'll save it for another call. We'll get into Ham, because we have a GitHub page and a demo file that has the custom functions. There's maybe about 80 tests within it, so it's all tested, and it's really, really solid code. So maybe we can talk about that on another call. Maybe at the same time we can talk about API first design or something like that too. Maybe we'll do that for next week.
Yeah, that's all related. I like that.
Yeah.
Hey, as a closing question here, if I want to grow up to be Eric or Charles, what do I need to be reading, studying? Used to back in the day, I had the FileMaker 4 Bible sitting on the desk. So what do we need to have a click away to be training ourselves in the skills that we need to do this?
Blush. Actually, I asked Eric last night, I said, how do you feel, what have you changed? What's changed over the past year and a half in terms of how you think about coding and things like that?
I learned a lot of new JavaScript and new HTML, but it's definitely, I say the API first design is probably the biggest change over the past year and a half that I've implemented within FileMaker and outside of FileMaker now in BettterForms, because I found so much flexibility in that, and then branching to other things that I can now move to whatever. But I always do a lot of experimenting, and I'll build something and I'll play with it. It helps to have an idea, a goal like this, the Mint Guru that I was able to build. But yeah, JavaScript, HTML, even and Tailwind CSS is a great way to get started with some easy ways to build.
And I don't think I'm thinking like how much HTML. It's a little bit, but if you've never done anything like with HTML, that's for real deep customization. And Eric's done a fair bit on his app. I would say about probably 70% maybe custom, something like that. And it can seem intimidating at first, but you plunk a new FileMaker developer or a new person in front of FileMaker and say, hey, I want you to create a master detail, and that can be intimidating. A little maybe easier now. Or I want you to create this recursive custom function. Well, there you go. So that's really maybe hard at first. And then later on, once you understand the core concepts, code is code. There's a fundamental structure to all computer languages that doesn't change. And once you sort of know the nomenclature of the new environment, it's pretty much all the same, I think.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here and say, from a FileMaker-centric development standpoint, it was easy to do simple stuff in BettterForms. Really, really hard to do anything more than that. Until then, I worked with Eric and Delphs, and they would explain what they were doing, and then you could see it and you could go, oh, okay, now it's translating. But if you don't have that background, like you say, what is it you should know? There's a lot you should know. And if you go and you start learning JavaScript and you do some tutorials, it's not simple, straightforward for a beginner to translate that to BettterForms. I didn't find. It was easier to play with stuff and make things happen and try and do simple things on my own, then work with someone who has the skills to get a better understanding how you can then go to the next level and what you might need to understand to go to the next level. But I mean, thinking way, way, way back eons ago when I was learning FileMaker, it was the same way. You could do your own simple thing in FileMaker. Then you'd go to DevCon and you'd see something and think, okay, I need to up that level. It's the same kind of thing. But I would say if you can get in there and start working with it, you can start working with it pretty easily.
And I would also highly encourage JSON if you've still been for some reason holding off at JSON, just jump into JSON, please, because or even look at other APIs, because Colleen, that was something that I know when we first started working together, you told me I'm totally comfortable with JSON, and I could give you all these JSON terms, and it was a great back and forth, because I think that knowledge helped you a ton. I think.
Yeah, that's probably true. I've done a lot of API work, so I understood, and I understood the separation pretty easily. You're going to throw this at me, and I'm going to throw this back to you.
We found that works really well. I do that. We do that with Jason, our in-house developer. I usually work on the front end. He primarily works on the back end. And I know a number of other developers, dev houses that have done that. Chris Conger and Steve Winter did the same kind of thing where they, Steve built a gorgeous app in the front end. And, Chris was every night, there are 2 different time zones, so he's supplying the data, because you do have that separation. So you're not, when you put something on the screen, you create this notification email field. It doesn't have to exist in the back end. You can build this all up and completely abstract it from the back end and then connect the back end later on.
Yeah.
That's almost another talk maybe about how developers can work together. But I think, I don't know, what do you think, Eric? Maybe do we want to talk about API first design next week? And what was the other thing? Ham?
With that.
Or
that'd be great.
Unless Colleen wants to show off her app, but I don't want to make it. I really don't want FM BettterForms. I don't want Friday Live to be totally about FM BettterForms. I want it to be more about just developing in our community and just kind of exposing some of the stuff that I'm exposed to daily from the outside world, if you will, into and bringing some of those concepts into FileMaker land. I think that's really a good goal as well.
We could take a poll on the participants, vote yes or no if you want to see API design.
Or I guess you can't have an either or. How do you vote again? Where is it?
In the participants, where did
manage? No, I got manage participants, but yours is going to be different.
Actually, I don't see it.
I don't know.
I don't know. Okay, sorry.
All right. Well, you guys can jump in if you have something that you'd like to see us feature or even present next week. We don't have any. We don't have a big lineup for way out down the road, but there's lots of content, so we're not too worried about it. And if we don't have anything else, we'll talk about API first design and HAM, and because they kind of integrate together. Because I think that would be a good one. How are we doing for time? I think we're done anyway.
Yeah, I gotta jump off. So.
Well, Eric, that was awesome. I had tremendous feedback. Like I got a ton of private messages about and to the public ones about how great your presentation was, and it's pretty cool to see somebody whip something up in 5 minutes, in 5 months, and build like a pretty complete app. And there's always work to do. It never stops as far as the UI and tweaking and that kind of stuff goes. I don't think it ever ends. I think everybody sort of had some good takeaways from there. Guys, we're going to be, this meeting is recorded. We will send it out, and we'll probably send it out in an email. Sorry for sending 2 emails. I got a really crummy but cheap CRM that we use for sending emails, and you never know if you're sending 1 or 2 or 5. So we'll try to eventually change that. So I apologize for that. And hopefully next week we'll only get 1. All right. Any other questions from anyone? All right, I'm going to finish our recording now, but if you guys, some people did have some other questions regarding some other things that some other topics, so we can jump into those too.